Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 396 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Peter Boghossian. He's a philosophy professor at Portland State University and author of the book A Manual for Creating Atheists. Together with James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, he published a series of intentionally ridiculous papers in academic journals in order to show that editors care more about ideological conformity than intellectual rigor. As you might imagine, this did not go over well with many of his colleagues. And we'll be speaking with him today about his obsession with science fiction TV shows and about his new book, How to Have Impossible Conversations, which he wrote with James Lindsay. And now here's our interview with Peter Boghossian. All right, so we're here with Peter Boghossian. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, David.
So how did you first get interested in science fiction?
Oh, this is one of my, all right, well, you're talking about science fiction. This is one of my favorite topics. This could be a long podcast. It's a hobby of mine, and I've liked it ever since I've been a child. I used to watch the old Lost in Space, and then I used to read a ton when I had, now I watch my science fiction movies and TV, and I read nonfiction. But ever since I was a child, it's just always been my passion, my hobby.
Did you, were your parents into it, or teachers or friends or anything?
No, in fact, they always found it to be bizarre. If I can tell a little story to help.
Yeah, sure.
To help in this, my mentor was a fascinating guy by the name of Frank Wesley. And one day I brought my son over to his house, and my son was hungry, and so we're looking around his house for something to eat. He had nothing to eat. He had only some bananas in the cupboard. And I said, no, he doesn't eat bananas. He said, no, he'll eat this banana. So he took the banana and he cut out with a knife a long rectangular strip, peeled it away, took a spoon, carved out a little banana, put a little bit in his mouth, handed my son the spoon, and then my son ate the whole banana, and I was flabbergasted by that. And I said, Frank, how did you know he would eat the banana? You know, why did he eat the banana? And he said, not only do I not know why he ate the banana, he doesn't even know why he ate the banana. And I thought there was something incredibly profound in that. Like, we don't know why we like what we like. I have no idea why I like why I'm obsessed with science fiction, TV, and movies. I have no idea why certain people, there may be a biological explanation of sexual proclivities. I have no idea, but the desires and wants, etc. Well, we really have no idea why we like these things. I have no idea why I like science fiction so much.
But so you were saying that people thought you were weird for liking science fiction growing up? I think it's a weird hobby to have. You know, it's like who do I talk to about my hobby, and who am I gonna? You know, it's kind of a weird thing for a 53-year-old adult male to nobody really wants to talk about it. But then when you meet somebody who has the same hobby, I suppose it's like, you know, model trains or anything. You just sit there for hours on end talking about your hobby. So I will admit it's an unusual hobby. Yeah, well, I want to talk about science fiction, so
you've met the right man.
Yeah. So this mentor, Frank, is that somebody you met, like at what, how old were you when you met him?
I met him when I was in graduate school doing my dissertation. He survived Buchenwald, and he escaped, and he went back to liberate the very concentration camp in which he was interned. And when I first met him, I said, "Oh, geez, you know, it's obviously, you know, gold standard bad. Were you Jewish?" And he said, "No, but my parents were." I thought that was such an interesting response. He also told me something that was just so interesting to me. He said that the older Nazis treated him better than the younger Nazis. And the reason for that, he said, is because the younger Nazis, you know, mit Judenblut, the younger Nazis viewed being Jewish as a property of one's bloodline, that it just was something that was in you. Whereas the older Nazis viewed it as a choice and a religion. And I don't know, there was something very profound about that. It's probably a subject for a different conversation, that now that Bret Stephens published that thing in the New York Times about Ashkenazi Jews, and Steven Pinker has come up with that. But there's something very profound to me about that.
Is he the guy in the book who had done the study on U.S. defectors during the Korean War?
Oh my gosh, very good. You read that book very well. That's correct. That is absolutely correct. That's Frank Wesley. His German name, he was born in Germany, was Franz Wilson, but he had to change that because if he kept the name, he said, can I swear on your podcast?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, he said if he kept the name, when he went back to Germany, the Nazis would really torture the shit out of him. And he told me some fascinating stories. Like he was picked up on Kristallnacht. So think about this. He was picked up on Kristallnacht, and the officer that picked him up, the German officers, didn't know how to drive. So his father had to drive him to the police station on Kristallnacht. But the crazy thing is about that, it's just interesting how so many movies shape our understanding of things. Like there's never a question of, like, you see all these movies, it's just assumed that all the German officers and everybody just knows how to drive. And, what is it, 1937, and that's just 1936. That's just not true, But it's just so interesting how films and movies, specifically historical films and movies, shape our consciousness of things. Well, speaking of science fiction, I just watched Man in the High Castle, season 4. I thought that was just genuinely a really good show. Did you watch that?
We did a panel on, I think we just talked about season 1. I'm trying to remember if we talked about a little bit of season 2 too, but
yeah.
I haven't watched it since then.
It's very interesting. I won't give anything away, but I thought that a lot of people didn't like season 4. I really liked it. I thought it was interesting. I suppose I can't really tell you what I'm thinking about if you haven't seen it. Should I say it or no?
No spoilers.
Okay, all right, I won't say it. Okay.
But let me just go back to the thing, because I thought this was interesting. I mean, this was in the first 10 or 15 pages of the book, this thing about the U.S. defectors in the Korean War.
Yeah.
And as I remember it, basically, U.S. soldiers who defected to the North Korean side pretty much all came from this one base. And so Frank was like, what's going on at this base that's causing all these people to defect? And sort of what he found was that at this base, the way they were training them is that they were just telling them, oh, the North Koreans, they're just evil monsters and they're just awful in every possible way. And then when these guys got into the theater and they're like, I was just lied to, that wasn't true. And it made them wonder a lot more about, well, what else was I told that isn't true? And that made them much more susceptible to influence.
One more piece though, not only when they got in the theater, but when they were captured and their captors treated them with kindness, they realized that what they had been told wasn't true. And I think, again, maybe I'm just in a reflective mood, but I think that there is, again, something very profound about that Christians have lines of literature called relationship evangelism, about the way you convert people to Christ is through relationships. And I was just having dinner with a buddy of mine, and his wife, I don't know, was involved in some kind of vitamin company or something. I don't really know, but she was telling me that it's really like she expected to go and learn all about vitamins, but it was all about relationship building. And that is really the key, is that think about the things that you've been told in your life by people who love you and care about you, and you're much more likely to ascribe, to calibrate your confidence in the things that people tell you who love you and care about you is very, very high, even if you don't have sufficient evidence to warrant belief in those things, Like, I'll give you an example. I was, I wrote about this somewhere. I can't remember where it was, but my son wanted to leave the house, and it was cold. We live in Portland, Oregon, and I said, get a coat or you catch a cold. And my wife's a MD, PhD, professor of medicine. She said, no, that's not true. And instead of me saying, oh, what's your evidence for that or anything, I immediately became defensive. I said, of course it's true. Right? I mean, think of the incredible arrogance in just that. Like, of course it's true. I mean, by what basis do I have say I have no evidence whatsoever. But speaking about science fiction, the science fiction reference, 1,000 repetitions equals the truth. And so if you hear something so frequently, particularly if it comes from people who love you, that carries an emotional, those things have kind of a masked emotional valence to them. And so you're much more likely to ascribe higher confidence to those. So the idea for the prison camp, I mean, it's not just that principle universalizes it. It analogizes outward.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems to have very obvious implications for how you comport yourself on social media, because I feel like a lot of people on social media have this attitude like, the more ammo I can fire at my opponents, the more effective I'll be as an activist. And so I'll just call everyone a Nazi because I'm like turning the dial up to 10. What could be better than that? But that can really backfire if you're saying things that aren't true, and then people realize that they're not true, and then they start wondering if anything you say is true. If you don't,
that's correct. The assumption there is that they're doing that to kind of change people's minds. I think that they're doing that to virtue signal and to signal to their own tribe that they're a member. I think that they're doing that because they have a fear of loneliness and they seek a sense of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, I agree a lot of things that people do on social media, because I see this a lot too. I mean, like, people will, it's really rare, like 1,000 people will complain about something on social media, but then like nobody will send you a personal message saying, that's sincere and thoughtful and stuff. And you would think that would be, if they cared about changing your mind, that's what they would do. But then they wouldn't get any credit for that.
You're absolutely correct, and we don't get that mechanism of likes and then the dopamine receptors, et cetera. And I've actually sent people very earnest, sincere messages, and people have then posted those messages and then like, look at this Nazi tried to do something, and it's just, there is something particularly toxic about the current social media landscape. Yeah. James Lindsay, my writing partner, said who co-authored How to Have Impossible Conversations. He said, Twitter is like a cesspool that follows you. And I think there's something true. There's something true about that. You don't know when you can do something under the guise of anonymity. Many people, and I would argue that, I don't know if I have any evidence for this, but I would argue that those people fit in a certain type of psychotic, or not psychotic, they have a certain personality profile. They'll just, go to invective. They'll be much nastier. They'll be much meaner. But when you see these folks in real life, Larry Lessig has a piece about that in his book, Code 2.0. When you see these people in real life, they seem very reasonable, but you can do something under the guise of anonymity. You can really be a son of a bitch.
Yeah. All right. So I wanted to get to the book, and I wanted to get to Twitter stuff for sure. But first, I want to stick with your science fiction love for the moment. So,
sure.
So you were saying, that you don't even know why you love science fiction so much. You just love it. And
I do.
You pretty much grew up not knowing anyone else who was interested in science fiction.
That's true. And I wrote you ever read The Onion, the satirical magazine?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So the guy who co-founded that is a good buddy of mine. And we wrote a couple of science fiction screenplays together, but they never got picked up. So I don't know why I love it. If I could wave a wand and give myself my ideal job, it would not be what I've been doing for the past over a quarter century to fight the current lunacy of the age, whether it's, religious beliefs or now this insane social justice with an uppercase S and uppercase J or what have you. I just like to sit in a room and write science fiction TV all day, low budget science fiction TV shows. That would be like a dream come true to me. But I don't know why I have that. I don't know why I have that rather unusual desire. I wish I could tell you that something caused this in me, but I have no idea why.
So this guy Christopher Johnson is his name, right? Who co-founded The Onion. So how do you know him? Like, how did you get in touch with him in the first place?
Oh, we met years ago in New Mexico, and we just became friends.
And then did you? How did you discover that he was a fellow science fiction fan?
Oh, we were just good friends, and we used to, watch sci-fi together, and then we said, oh, let's write a script, and he has some friends in the industry, and they told us. So we wrote we wrote 2 or 3 scripts and then treatments. And I wanted to write something for the sci-fi that I wanted to watch, because I think that if I were to say there's one theme in sci-fi, it's, God, it could have been so much better. Like it just, like Sliders is a great example of that. Just a fantastic premise. And that guy, Joe Flanagan from Stargate Atlantis, was in a film about, parallel worlds. Like, I like parallel worlds. I like time travel. I like deep space. It's hard to do deep space stuff well because, they're all trapped on a ship and there's a monster. It's just boring. It's bland. So we did write something that we wanted to watch. And then we were told repeatedly that it was too intelligent and no one would watch it. And that was the time around the second Battlestar Galactica came out, and I thought that was a really, really good, really thoughtful show with good character development, and it was very well cast. The characters had a lot of gravitas, and it was just a thoughtful script. But anyway, so those screenplays never went anywhere, unfortunately. So I'm thinking about writing another one, but I don't, at this point in my life, and there's a new menace in which I'm currently about to wage a full-scale ideological war. So I don't really have time to write a science fiction screenplay at the moment.
So what was in your screenplay, do you think, that they thought was too intelligent for sort of a mass audience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really know. It was about a group of people who flee a political rebellion with a piece of artificial intelligence who in the first episode becomes sentient. I don't know. I think it would have been a niche hit. I really have no idea. I think that people consistently underestimate the type of people who like sci-fi, and I think the type of people who like sci-fi want to ask deep questions. They're interested in how things could be, and I think that's like the appeal to Star Trek of some of the treks. And they're also interested in not so much the technology, but just a remarkable story that's set in a technological landscape that's conceivable, but yet removed from their current experience. And again, I really do think the theme of most sci-fi, if I could say, what's one theme, it's, man, that could have been so much more.
I mean, I feel like you might try pitching that again, because I feel like the climate has changed a lot in terms of, you got shows now like The Expanse and Black Mirror and Watchmen that are like really smart, and you might find a more receptive audience now.
Yeah, I really, really liked the last season of The Expanse. I thought they did a really good job. I love the fact that they created a culture. I love the whole Belter. They had their own language, and I thought it was very well acted. The sets could have been a little bit better, but I just like the fact that they really did. Straczynski, who did Babylon 5 and a bunch of other stuff, he talks about the importance of creating a world. And I played D&D every Saturday. Today's Saturday, so we get to play D&D. And I think that the key is not just kind of running people through modules so much. Wizards of the Coast has tried to create these worlds. And we just put on a Lawful Evil campaign. I just put on a Lawful Evil campaign. My first time DMing, and I don't even know how long, 30 years or so. But I think the key is there to create worlds. And that's what I think good sci-fi does, is it just creates worlds. Richard Garriott from Origin, the Ultima guy, the Ultima Online stuff, he had, kind of brought that idea to life too. We create worlds. But yeah, maybe we'll pitch it again. Maybe we'll see what happens. It was a very interesting, I think it's an interesting story, but who knows? I don't really know about sci-fi demographics in terms of, what would be popular. It's very speculative.
So who do you play Dungeons & Dragons with?
I played Dungeons & Dragons with, who Matt Thornton is, Aliveness Ape on Twitter. He's Conor McGregor's, who's just going to fight the Cowboy coming up recently. He's Conor McGregor's coach's coach, and he's my jiu-jitsu coach. And we play with him, and we have a lot of people who kind of drop in. We had We played with Henry Atkins, a jiu-jitsu guy. We just played a game. Actually, we streamed it on Twitch with Chris Howder, who's his coach. So a lot of jiu-jitsu people we play with.
I mean, it was interesting because in the book, most of the examples involve common issues like gun control or abortion or death penalty. But there was just one that kind of jumped out at me where you're talking about the example is fantasy-based martial arts. And I was just curious. I guess that you have an interest in a specific interest in fantasy-based martial arts.
I do. I think it's very interesting because it's so easy to adjudicate those things. It's like you just put someone in a ring and you see what happens, of a comparable weight. And the key to that is that you want to see if there's a corrective mechanism, and jiu-jitsu provides a wonderful corrective mechanism. And so often people will switch claims. They'll say things like, oh, this is just for health. That's great. If it's just for health, that's fantastic. But then they'll change their tune. It's a hard concept to grasp, but Daniel Dennett talks about it in this piece on CHMES, CHMESS. If it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well. I'll repeat that because it's kind of a weird thing. If it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well. So some people spend a tremendous amount of time doing something that's not worth doing, and they do it well. And this is a hard concept to grasp, but you would be better off looking at a wall than learning some of these martial arts that will take you away from the process of protecting yourself, right? Some Taekwondo, you keep your hands down, someone's just going to punch you in the head, or, whatever other fantasy-based martial arts people subscribe to. But go ahead.
How do you think that those martial arts got started, the ones that don't work at all? What was the...
Oh, they all have origin stories. You should have Matt on your podcast. He can talk about that extensively. They all have these origin stories. Oh, this guy killed a bull, or he killed 50 guys, and we're the ancestors. And when you don't have enough evidence for something, you have to make up for that evidence. You have to make up for the lack of evidence. Like if your evidence leads you to calibrate your confidence at 70% in something, but yet you claim to be 90 or 95% in something, you have to make up that slack somehow. Maybe you make it up by these elaborate rituals. Everybody's sensei, they're bowing, they're doing all this crazy shit, But at the end of the day, what's really interesting about that is those people at some level know that doesn't work, and they just become dicks, right? There's just like a weird bully vibe, but you have to do that because you don't have enough evidence for the things that you're doing because there's no built-in corrective mechanism. So jiu-jitsu is wonderful. Jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, kickboxing. The guy McGregor's fighting has a crazy record in kickboxing. All of those are wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling. All those have built-in corrective mechanisms that allow expertise to flourish. So you can distinguish. There's a way to adjudicate those things. Fantasy-based martial arts doesn't have that.
Yeah, I thought it was. I actually listened to an interview you did with a martial arts podcast or something, and the guy he practiced. No, it was a really small thing.
Rokas.
Yeah, and so and he practiced Aikido for many years. And he said that, when he challenges Aikido practitioners to prove what they can do, they say, no, my technique is so deadly, I couldn't even show it to you because it would just be too dangerous.
Exactly. And that's one of their go-tos. That's one of the things they say. But that's just a way to be dishonest with yourself. It's a type of self-deception. Or it's just blatant dishonesty because they know that that's not true.
Yeah. All right, so going back to science fiction for a sec, so I was curious, that you're, I believe, a professor of philosophy. Is that right?
Yeah.
So would you say that there was any connection between your interest in science fiction and getting interested in philosophy?
I think so. I mean, I'd love to teach a class in science fiction philosophy. I have a feeling I'm not going to be at the university much longer. They're doing what they can to make me uncomfortable, and they're doing a good job at it. So I do think so. I think that a lot of people, I think that there's an overlap in, not necessarily in philosophy per se, but people who really like to think about things and engage ideas is a general rule. They tend to go into certain types, or like certain types of science fiction. That's my speculation. I don't really have any evidence for that, but it seems to be the case. I like to escape reality, and in terms of stepping into kind of a sci-fi world with personalities, etc. I really loved the show Farscape. I thought it did a fantastic job at that. And the characterization was just really lovely. But I do think, my favorite episodes of shows have always been something that's a little more engaging, a little more thoughtful, and philosophically reflective.
Yeah, so, how I kind of got interested in talking to you about science fiction is that I watched this appearance on something called the Mile High Sanity Project. I was just curious, how did that come about, and how did they know that you were a science fiction fan?
Boy, I don't even remember that. I think I've given very few people actually talk to me about science fiction, so so at this point I really almost try not to talk about it because it's kind of a distraction from the other stuff that I'm doing. But I don't remember that specifically. Oh, hey, can I go back to one thing I've been thinking about? Do you ever watch Babylon? Do you ever watch Babylon 5?
I've watched episodes of it, but I haven't watched.
Oh man, you have to. That is just a mandatory show. That's mandatory. Then the reference will be lost. But yeah, I would highly recommend that. I'll give you 20 or 30 shows at the end of the hour that I would suggest to check out.
Well, let me say, so I listened to your appearance on this thing, the Mile High Sanity Project, and I just wrote down all the TV shows that you mentioned. And there are 20 shows that I haven't watched, or some I haven't even heard of. I'll tell you what, I'm just going to read this list real quickly. Okay, so you mentioned Blake 7, Charlie Jade, Falling Skies, Fringe, Torchwood, The Prisoner, The 4400, Space 1999, Lex, Earth Final Conflict, Jeremiah, Andromeda, Eureka, Daybreak, Continuum, Defiant, Alien Nation, Quantum Leap, Sarah Connor Chronicles, V, and Space Above and Beyond. And I haven't even seen most of those. Some of them I've watched a couple episodes. But I do this.
I'm a little embarrassed.
So I talk about science fiction and have full time for a decade, and I was just astounded by how many shows there were that you would watch that I haven't. So you must spend a lot of time.
No, I do. I'm telling you, I'm obsessed with it. It's my hobby. I'm fascinated by it, and I am a little embarrassed about it. My wife at some point said, you just really should rein it in and not really try not to talk about it too much to people because they'll think you're a lunatic. But I don't know what to tell you, man. I just love it. I find it fascinating, and I would really love to just leave the social justice lunatics to utterly destroy the society and the right-wing maniacs in the Trump administration and just go off in my own little hut and write science fiction all day.
I mean, do you watch science fiction TV every night or a couple nights a week, or how often?
Yeah, I watch it every night. So I'll, go to work or I'll write. And the last thing I do before I fall asleep, unless it's December, I've had a very productive month in December. I binge watch a lot of sci-fi shows, but I watch TV every single night before I go to bed. I watch some sci-fi TV show or movie. I've exhausted the genre. I don't think there's anything I haven't seen, and the good stuff I've seen multiple times.
Well, I wrote down what some of my favorite TV shows are. Have you seen Dark on Netflix?
Yes, I liked it.
Yeah, the other ones that we've covered, I'm sure you've seen. But
give me the list.
Well, these are my favorites from the last few years. Say the last 3 years would be The Expanse, Dark, Watchmen, Black Mirror, and Rick and Morty.
Yeah, so tell me about The Watchmen. So I finished that. I just binge watched that. What do you think about that?
I thought it was fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you can listen to our review of it if you want. But I mean, I thought that the finale was a little weak. But I just thought some of the episodes in the middle, there's this one where you find out. I'll try not to do spoilers in case people listening to this haven't seen it. But it goes into the history, sort of the origin story of one of the superheroes. And just the way that
good.
it's just incredibly interesting and artistic, and the way it's filmed, it moves through different layers of time and memory, and I just thought it was mesmerizing.
Yeah, I thought the first few episodes I was like, wow, this is just, I didn't really know what to make. It reminded me of the movie Existence, but like I didn't really know what to make of it. It was just kind of weird. And then it just got on a trajectory that it had me hooked. I will admit I didn't think the protagonist was as strong as she could have been. I'm trying to think of how to say this without a spoiler. I guess I can't say it without a spoiler. But Don Johnson plays the cop in the beginning in the pilot episode. And I liked, without giving anything away, I liked the trajectory of what happened there. You've seen that in a lot of stuff post Game of Thrones, that I've really enjoyed that. But the whole, again, I'm always hesitant because I want to spoil it. The whole rain thing, if you know what I mean, RAIN, from the sky, I thought that was utterly brilliant.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great. And I would definitely recommend you should go check out our conversation about it, because I thought, I have a couple panelists, and I thought they did a really great job.
Yeah, well cast, well acted, very high production values, very thoughtful script.
Absolutely. So do you watch a lot of feature films as well, science fiction feature films, or mostly the TV shows?
No, feature films too. Anything science fiction, I'll just devour.
So have you seen Prospect, The Endless? I guess those are the two that you might possibly not have seen on my list here.
No, I don't. What year did they come out?
These are recent, the last few years. And they're
Are they Netflix, Hulu? What are they?
They're indie films. I rented
How
them.
Can I get them?
Off of iTunes. I rent them off of iTunes.
Okay, cool. Either email me after the conversation we're having, and I'll go download them tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Prospect and The Endless are just great.
Okay, cool. Excellent.
And then I guess I was just curious if James Lindsay is a science fiction fan, since he has a degree in physics and stuff. Seems like a possibility.
I don't think so. I've never asked him. I know that he doesn't watch a lot of television and movies. He basically reads constantly. But I don't think he is. Oddly enough, we don't really talk about stuff like that. We're busy talking about other things. So, and we certainly have never watched anything together.
Do you ever read science fiction books?
No, I only read. No, well, not in the last decade or whatever. My favorite book up until I stopped reading sci-fi was The Forever War by Hadelman. And then the follow-up to that. I love that book. I think I won the Hugo and the Nebula, but I read nonfiction and watch fiction.
Yeah, no.
There's just too much stuff, there's just, especially in this space, that I'm in now, there's just too much stuff to learn. It's interesting, the whole God thing, when I did the atheism stuff, there's only so many things people can say to you. And I know this sounds weird, but I'm going to say this and people are like, what are you talking about? But those arguments, they're not even sophisticated. They're just, they're just pretty simple to understand with very few exceptions. But this new space of the, Culture War 2.0, the new religion that we're seeing emerge, that stuff is very, very complicated. It has a very rich history from Derrida, Lyotard, Foucault, et cetera, up to the application of postmodernism and critical race theory and such. And that takes a ton of my time to read. In fact, I'm just reading Jim and Helen's new book, Cynical Theories, which is a freaking masterpiece. Anyone who reads that will have a near comprehensive view of the current applied postmodern political climate in which we find ourselves. But anyway, the bottom line is no, I don't read fiction anymore.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about this new book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. And yeah, it's a really dense book. I mean, I feel like most books I read, I pretty much get everything the first time through. Yeah. And this is one where I'm like, okay, I need to, I have to finish it in time for the interview, but otherwise I would want to slow way down and go over this. And I'll just read some of the terms just to give listeners a sense of what's in this book that, these are sort of terms you wouldn't probably be familiar with. Ultracasting, golden bridges, superordinate identities, calibrated questions, doxastic closure, Rappaport's rules, and the unread library effect.
Yeah, doxastic, there's only two big words in the whole book, like two specialty terms. I think I wrote this in there. One is epistemology, which is how you know what you know, and the other one is doxastic. I think I might have even put that in the end notes, but doxastic just comes from the Greek doxa, which means belief. But the rest of the stuff is, like unread library effect or golden bridges, etc. The book has 36 techniques. 35 of them are unbelievably well sourced, from hostage negotiations to cult exiting to drug and alcohol programs, applied epistemology, etc. And the other technique is something I've been playing with, the speculative technique. But it goes through literally every single thing that you could. It synthesizes these very dense bodies of literature and breaks it down into techniques, and those go from fundamental, basic, intermediate, advanced, expert, master, something like that. And we highly recommend that you go sequentially, but the point of the book is to empower people to speak across divides when they think that there are gulfs that they can't. Someone believes something, or this person is a Trump supporter or Elizabeth Warren or whatever it is. Or this person believes we need a big wall or no wall. Everyone should have a gun. No one should have a gun. I can't talk to a person like this. Well, the point of the book is to empower people to have those impossible conversations.
So, one of the interviews I saw with you, you said that you had read a lot of transcripts of hostage negotiators. And you mentioned earlier that... and
listened too. I listened as well.
Okay, yeah. And that we form so many of our ideas about things just from watching movies. And I was just curious, do the real life hostage negotiations seem like did it surprise you, or were they different from what you would see in a movie, or what you had sort of imagined how they would go?
That's a good question. They were a lot longer, because in movies you only get highlights where there's movies like an hour, 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. But these were very, very detailed and in-depth stuff. And there's a guy, Chris Voss, who writes some good literature on this. But no, I think it's pretty much, the movies have those things condensed. You want to build rapport. We talk about language, about calibrated questions that you mentioned. You ask a question that doesn't yield a yes, no, but yields, like, what do you think about this? Or how is a calibrated question. So it doesn't lend itself, how did you come to that belief? It doesn't lend itself to, do you believe this? Yes or no? So that it's pretty much, some of those things are pretty intense. It's life or death, and you're talking to people who are in high stress situations, and if you make a mistake, someone could die.
So are those just online or something? The audio from hostage negotiations? Do you have to go to a library or something?
Yeah, you can pretty much find anything online, or you can get those. They're just, you can find pretty much everything you want online nowadays. You can read the transcripts too.
I mean, the thing that really, I would say, jumped out at me the most from the book is this quote. The guy says, if you want to influence people, you also need to understand empathetically the power of their point of view and feel the emotional force with which they believe in it. It is not enough to study them like beetles under a microscope. You need to know what it feels like to be a beetle. And
that's exactly correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that just struck me so much because, obviously it makes sense, or I think anyone would know that you have to understand your opponent's point of view. But this idea that you have to feel it, you have to understand at an emotional level why they believe what they do, I thought was a really interesting insight.
Yeah, and the key there, at a surface level, one key is that we walk around questioning people's conclusions, which is just a horrible way to engage the world, not for no other reason than your own mental sanity. But you won't help people become more humble about what it is that they claim to know. You mentioned Rappaport's rules. You won't even understand what they believe. You have to focus on epistemology. So, why does someone believe that? And you'll find that on most beliefs, they're not held for epistemological reasons. In other words, they're not held because the evidence leads someone to that position, but they're held because people in their community believe it. They're held for moral reasons. So they're held because people believe that believing that will make you a better person. Dennett calls that belief in belief. And many of these conversations are so difficult if they have an identity level salience. So often when you're having these conversations, you need to figure out someone's epistemology why they feel it, not only why they believe it. And try to get yourself in that headspace. And we talk about exactly how to do that in the book. And you just do that with, you don't have to go rogue or anything. All these templates are in the book. We've done all the work for you. I did my dissertations in prisons, and then I carried it forward with, in the atheist movement with hardline religious believers and general conversations. And you can see a lot of this stuff online if you want to see how it's applied. But the key in all this is once you get the stuff from the book, really try to figure out how somebody, what is the method that someone uses for believing this? And the key there is if someone knows something you don't know, you should know it too. But when you really get in that headspace and you're willing to revise your beliefs, those conversations are incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful.
I mean, one thing about that quote that really sort of jumps out at me is, I think because it involves empathy and Beatles, is it really made me think of Ender's Game. I don't know if did you ever read that?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember, but so in Ender's Game, Ender, the main character, he has to fight these alien insects.
Right.
And he's the product of a breeding program, and he has an older brother and sister, and the military, they're trying to get the right balance of empathy versus ruthlessness, and his older brother was too ruthless and his older sister was too empathetic, and he's kind of a good balance where he's empathetic enough to get inside the minds and hearts of the enemy and figure out what they're going to do, but ruthless enough to destroy them if it comes to it. And I just thought it was interesting that science fiction novel from decades ago sort of was getting at that same idea of empathy being necessary in a...
Yeah, that's a really good insight. And many people, myself and you and everyone, unless you're a psychopath, you feel things deeply and things have a moral resonance to them. And I think that one of the tragedies of the age, and you mentioned social media, exacerbated by social media, is that we don't ascribe, in philosophy you call it a hermeneutic of charity. We don't ascribe, in anthropology as well, but charitable interpretations for why people believe things or why people do things. It's not that they're bad people. It's just that they have certain information and they're acting from that information. And so one of the things that we could do to really heal our current divide and perhaps put more civility into our society, in which we're, in my opinion, in desperate need of, is just stop walking around assuming everybody has bad intentions. People feel things very deeply and they have beliefs that you might not agree with, but you might even find them odious. And the more odious you find them, the more important it is to really try to figure out, okay, where are they coming from and why are they believing this and what does this mean to them? And, what am I missing? Like if I had, my mentor used to say to me, Frank, if I had your life experience and your genetics, I'd be doing exactly what you're doing. In other words, when you take the ghost out of the machine, the spirit, the soul, etc., we have a kind of mechanism, it's not necessarily that the universe is mechanistic or what have you, but it's that people don't really choose their beliefs in terms of this global freedom to which we ascribe belief choice. Often it's post hoc rationalizations. They have a feeling first, and then they seek things in their epistemic landscape to justify that feeling. And so, if anything, that should call people to be more compassionate when they're having conversations with somebody. Like if I had your genetics and your upbringing, I wouldn't be in the savannah right now throwing spears at gazelles or whatever. I'd be talking to me on the phone right now.
Well, it's funny, I was going through some of my old tweets the other day, and I came across this tweet where I said, and this was years ago, I mean, it's gotten so much worse since then, but I said, I feel like on Twitter, if I said the most innocuous thing, nice weather today, all the responses would be like, why don't you care about skin cancer? Like, who's paying you to say that? Right. Like, it's just this incredible paranoid, echo chamber, feeding frenzy sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a kind of cultural derangement. And I think that the key to figure out how to navigate that is, and I don't know that this is an age thing, but I think it may be. I think the thing is to figure out whose voice doesn't matter. And I was just talking to Helen Pluckrose about this. We did grievance studies stuff together, and she will engage people who are clearly bad faith actors. not a fan of using the word faith in that way, but I don't really have any other word to use, that they're clearly malintentioned. They're clearly griefing her. They're clearly intentionally misunderstanding what she's saying. And then she's such a lovely human being that, she'll just spend so much time trying to correct these misunderstandings. And I will tell her, like, Helen, their voices just don't matter. They're griefing you. They're trolling you. They don't even use their real names in their accounts. So when you figure out whose voice doesn't matter, and there really is a kind of tragedy to that. And the tragedy is that, talked about the martial arts before, et cetera. We all need these corrective mechanisms. We need to keep our own beliefs in check. And one of the ways that you do that is that you listen to when people say, hey, you're out of line about this or you're wrong. But when we have everybody calling us a Nazi or telling us we should care about skin cancer instead of posting about this, it's hard. There's so much static that it's hard to really give yourself an opportunity to correct your cognitions and beliefs, to retether them to kind of, in some lawful way to reality. So the only thing you can do is you just have to ignore these people. There's just no other way. I mean, look, you can't listen to everybody who's calling you a Nazi. If you have a substantive criticism to make, you can make it. And one more thing, I mean, the tragedy, the real, not even the tragedy, what's really grotesque about that is that if you really parse those out and you look, a lot of those people come from the academy. They're like professors or, they're scholars and things. And we train these people to not make arguments and instead, just hurl invectives at people. Sorry, go ahead. You were saying?
Oh, I was just saying, I mean, one thing that I just as an experiment that I've kind of been doing on Twitter is that I basically follow anyone who's the target of any sort of pile-on or, cancellation attempt or anything. And just because I'm kind of curious, to track, how do they respond, what happens to them long term and things like that. And I can always unfollow them later if they turn out to be a truly odious person or whatever. But I just think it's interesting. And I just wonder if a critical mass of people took that approach, if all these things would lose their bite because, someone would go after you and say all these nasty things about you. And then a certain number of people would unfollow you. But then maybe a proportional number of people would follow you just out of sympathy, on principle. And, people wouldn't, people would sort of lose their enthusiasm for these attacks because they would see them as ineffectual.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Abraham Lincoln's, someone said to him allegedly something to the extent of, oh, he's a really horrible person, and I think he's a horrible person. I have to get to know him better, and maybe correct that perception about them. Most people are simply not horrible people. But what we have is we have a small number of hyper-vocal people who, as Dave Rubin was saying, a lot of these people probably have sock puppet accounts and what happens is they're just so hyper-vocal and they've managed to not only do this on Twitter and such, but weaponize mechanisms designed for social justice with both lower and uppercase SJ, like Office of Diversity and such. But, they have it just seems like, plus there's a whole psychology behind this where we take the negative things people say about those and inflate those beyond their warrant. So, it's hard to talk. I guess if someone young is listening to this, I realize that you've grown up in an environment in which social media is your reality. Like, I got that. But my sincere advice to you would be to just take a step back and say, does it really matter that an anonymous person with 5 followers is calling your names? Really, ultimately, no, right? When Twitter used to have eggs for people who didn't register profiles, Ruben was saying to me, hey, when we were in LA, I think we were going out to get ice cream, and he said, if we're walking down the street now and someone comes up to you in a Twitter egg in an egg costume and starts yelling at you and screaming that you're a Nazi and a homophobe, etc., you think they're a lunatic and you just run away. But yet when someone does that to you on social media, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Or you feel you have to engage them, or no, you don't have to engage anybody. You're under no obligation whatsoever to engage anybody on social media. And you're under less obligation if one of the tragedies of the age is that when we've made this move towards subjectivity and away from objectivity, or at least an objectively knowable world, and that's a vestige of postmodernism, one of the tragedies of that is that we Tom Nichols talks about this in The Death of Expertise. We give everybody's voice. We equate having a platform with having an expertise. Years ago, people used to criticize people on the basis of some domain-specific expertise that they possess. Now everybody's criticizing everybody, and they think that their subjective feelings are a guide to reality. Well, as I said in my Easter Bunny talk years ago, conviction is evidence of nothing but conviction. Just because someone has a strong moral impulse to something or, strong feelings about something, that doesn't mean anything.
I mean, you were saying earlier that you're not sure how much longer you'll be at your academic job. And that seems like maybe an example of it does matter what people say about you on social media. Or do you think that you would be in the same situation without social media? Because it seems like that is sort of has raised the temperature of everything.
Well, you're certainly correct about that. No, I mean, the university, at least Portland State University, is an ecosystem, and it's an echo chamber, and they have dominant moral values in that echo chamber. And it really is remarkable to me. I think one of the things that used to frustrate me until you realize why this is the case, one of the things that used to frustrate me is, wow, these people are really smart, and they're institutionalizing policies not only for which there's no evidence, but there's actually evidence against this stuff. But Michael Shermer from the Skeptic Society, his insight is, one of the greatest insights in the history of critical thinking is the smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing bad ideas. And James Lindsay and I published a piece in the Philosopher's Magazine and took his insight and applied it to academic systems. So groups of smart people now, like in the academy or specifically in academia and the humanities, and it's now even spreading to the STEM fields, really are beholden to collective delusion.
Just as I was doing research for this interview, I came across an article by Toby Young and Quillette where it's called "Why I Want to Start a Free Speech Trade Union," and he lists you as one of the people who might, one of the situations where that might be a benefit. I was just curious if you saw that article or if you have any thoughts about a free speech trade union.
No, I haven't. I have to read that to be able to make some kind of intelligent commentary on it. But I think that I can't speak to the free speech trade union, but I can speak to, I think people have conceptualized this and thought about this in terms of free speech, and that's accurate. There's certainly nothing inaccurate or incorrect about that. But the deeper and more profound thing in which we see occurring, it's an attempt to rob you of your cognitive liberty. So it's not just free speech is a proxy to cognitive liberty. You ought not to think certain things. You ought not to question certain ideas. You ought not to. It's really an ugly totalizing worldview.
So if you end up leaving academia, do you have sort of a plan for how you'll be spending your time?
Yeah, I do. I'll be giving talks. I'll be working on my next book. I'll be doing everything that I planned on doing anyway without being tormented by the administration and without waking up and walking into a job where people hate me and are trying to make my life miserable, which is an ideological sewer anyway. So, what's the point of it? I guess I would be doing everything I would be doing without being harassed, which would be nice.
Well, so you mentioned your next book. Is there anything you can say about the next book?
My next book is going to be about social justice. That's all I'm going to say. I keep meaning to start that, but then something else pulls me back. But my next book is going to be about social justice, and I truly tell you from the bottom of my heart, I would love to not think about and write about this cultural sickness that we're experiencing now, but it is what it is.
Well, I think you should spend some time writing some more science fiction, because, I mean, in this interview you mentioned, it sounded like there was a really cool ship that you had in one of your screenplays. It was like the Bag of Marbles ship.
Oh, where did that come? How did you figure? Wow, yeah.
In this Mile High Sanity project, you had sent them your script and they had read it and they were asking you questions about it.
Oh, okay, cool. I don't remember that. Yeah. Yeah, maybe that'd be good. The problem is I've passed the point of concern, and I'm into the point of worry about what's happening not only so the nucleation point of all this stuff is the universities, and as Jordan Peterson and others have correctly pointed out, it's about 3 to 5 years the stuff seeps out of the university, and we see woke culture now in virtually everything, and we see this lack of ability to have civil discourse and dialogue and communicate across divides. Instead, we see bullying. We see ridicule. We see everything that the society would need to drive a wedge between people and groups and individuals. And if this problem, if I can ameliorate this problem, great. But this problem is certainly not going to fix itself on its own. I'm also deeply worried about our environmental problems and the fact that people are just valuing the wrong things. I had a talk with a buddy of mine, Tim Van Gelder, who's a applied epistemologist in Melbourne, and he was telling me, I asked him about the whole Australian situation and the fires and such, and I said, I read a piece that this is about arson. What role does arson play? He's like, that's total disinformation. It's totally put out. We had a really interesting conversation, and you can look subsequent to that. But the idea there is that we also have ecological crises, and that those are fueled by, as we've talked about, social media and now fake news, which we haven't talked about.
Well, just to be clear, you're saying that the arson is sort of a smokescreen, no pun intended, and really climate change is the issue, or?
I'm saying that's what he told me. I'm not a climate change expert, but I'm saying that what he told me is that the arson thing was fabricated. Okay. It doesn't mean that there wasn't an arsonist, but that this whole thing was a result of arson, and it has nothing to do with anything else other than arson. And there's no evidence for that. It's a narrative that was put out. Look, I'm not an expert in this stuff. Read it. If it turns out to be false, I'll revise my beliefs. I'm not wedded to it. But the larger point is that we have very substantive, serious ecological problems that we need to address. The crisis of plastic in the oceans. There's just too much. There's too many problems. The homelessness problem here, the opioid epidemic, which my wife works on. We just have too many problems for me at this point. I need to be in the twilight of my career before I start writing science fiction screenplays. There are just too many problems. So I can't do that yet.
Well, let me just push back on that.
And then I got to go. I got to take my daughter to lunch. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll wrap this up in a sec. But let me just push back on that a little bit, because I don't know if you know this. There's this famous thing where Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura on the original Star Trek, she met Martin Luther King, and she said,
"Yes, I remember that. That's a great story."
Thinking about leaving the show, and he said, "No, you can't. It's what you're doing is too important." And that science fiction can be a vehicle for changing the world, and in addition to writing articles and everything else.
Yeah, I would hope that's the case. Here's the next step in the move in the space I'm in. The next step is to go. Douglas Murray's book took it to the gates. The next step is to walk right into the academy and call it out, particularly call out colleges of education, which Lyle Asher has done. All of the colleges of education are predicated on one book, Paulo Freire's The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He's a Brazilian educator, and it's about remediating oppression and teaching to that end pedagogically. Certainly nothing wrong with that. In fact, at its core, it's probably important. But the next step is that this has to be engaged directly at a level so that pre-service college teachers and colleges of education have at the very least an alternative, and not just an alternative narrative, but something that harkens back to ancient values, Socratic values. This is what truth is. This is what epistemology is. This is what the scientific method is. This is how you differentiate fact from opinion. Like shit that people should already be taught, but the whole system is so ideological it's gone utterly off the rails right now. So.
Yeah, well,
cool.
Well, yeah, I think we should start wrapping this up there, and I'll let you go. And I just want to thank you so much, Peter, for giving me so much time to talk to you. And I really enjoyed this book. It's called How to Have Impossible Conversations, a Very Practical Guide by Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. Thanks, David. Appreciate it, man.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Peter Boghossian for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.